Good evening. It's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 diary series, and we are finishing up the long diary entry of the 7th of November 1917. I think this is it's the final part, but I think it's part 6, so it was quite a long one, but it had a lot of ground to cover, beginning with events in Russia, then going to the purely personal, and today Dmitri finishes up with a little more, not about what's going on in Russia, but what's going on among Russian troops nearby. All right, so our recap: in yesterday's video, we had this much anticipated showdown with Lady Marling. I don't mean anticipated by us, I mean anticipated by him. He was not going to rock the boat and break the impasse himself. They hadn't really been speaking to each other. Or, they were, but there was such strain between them that it was becoming unbearable for him, and apparently also for her, because she finally started that conversation. And one of the things I talked about was that Dmitri, overall, looking at his entire body of writings, just wasn't a romantic person. And so he sometimes didn't understand, seemingly, why women reacted the way they did when he kind of drew back a little bit. And the other thing was that he's very concerned always about the possibility of looking ridiculous. That seems to be one of his sort of primal fears, that people will look at him in a laughing kind of way, oddly enough. And he's concerned about that on behalf of other people as well. He was afraid of exactly that happening to Sir Charles, which it may well have. And in Lucia's case, not that she was looking silly, but that well, yes, because he thought, well, she's so much older than me, but that it would have a dire effect on her reputation. All right, so big recap. Sorry about that. Onward we go to this last part. And I also am going to do, there's a very short diary. As you know, Dmitri always goes back in time. He does these long diary entries that are also summaries of what has happened between 6 and 10 days before, and then he goes back and fills in the details of those days. So we're going to do a short diary entry of the 30th of October. All right, here we go. I will again return briefly to Russian matters. I forgot to say that same Colonel Rawlinson passed along strange things about the Qazvin committee. Apparently something has happened there. That committee has always had Bolshevik views, but when the 10th Automobile Company transferred from Enzeli to Qazvin, it became even worse. After all, even by the end of March, they had seized the staff printing press and published a disgusting newspaper in the most socialistic spirit. Now, apparently, a new committee has been created in Qazvin, a committee of public safety that got rid of the old one, shut down its newspaper, and set about energetically restoring order. But I don't know if that means revolutionary order or some other kind, exclamation point. If it's true, then it's an extremely typical phenomenon with regard to what's been happening lately, exclamation point. Now I'll switch to a description of what's been happening here since my diary entry on Sunday, 29th October. Yes, to begin with, I should say that my money situation has gotten a little better. I received the money obtained for me by Yevrenov and paid my debt to Staroselsky. Then I somehow ended up back at the club playing baccarat again, and this time I won 1,400 tumans from that same Staroselsky. So now our roles have been reversed. This is much better and more pleasant. All right. 30th of October, Monday. It was a very quiet day. I didn't dine out, and in the afternoon, Lady Marling and I went riding, and it was a very dull excursion, and the conversation didn't flow. Okay, that's all for that. Now, if you've been hearing crunching noises and now drinking noises in the background, that's my Great Dane. Sorry about that. All right, so some interesting things here, and some things that you can't find a lot about online, but clearly something happened, and I would guess that what Dmitri has to say is probably pretty accurate. He was getting it from not disinterested, but from a person who was there and who wasn't. Yeah, I mean, who was outside of the whole Russian context. He was British. Colonel Rawlinson, I really don't know anything about him, but he was the one who earlier brought Dmitri this hopeful news that while he was in Qazvin, that he had heard that that they'd gotten a telegram that said everything was great in Russia, that the Bolshevik Revolution had been put down. Anyway, as we know, that wasn't true. But that doesn't mean that Colonel Rawlinson was a sort of suspicious figure. It just means that he got that information, right? Okay, so what's going on? Well, all over Russia, you had during the whole course of the revolution, from the first revolution, the February Revolution, you had these committees forming, the soldiers and workers committees they were called, and they were indeed made up of soldiers and workers, and they would do their best to just take over across the boards. And so the idea was that the soldiers in the regiments and the workers would listen to them and not to their commanders, and so they would take power away from the commanders, or at least the commanders would have to work very closely with them and be very careful and not do things that agitated them. At the very least, compromises. So, not surprisingly, we find out that had also happened in Qazvin. And I should just say a bit about Qazvin. So the name is usually spelled, when it's transliterated into Latin letters, it seems primarily to be spelled Qazvin. I've seen it also spelled Kazvin. It was in the north, in the Russian-controlled part of Persia. And I quote from AI, Qazvin was the main Russian staging base northwest of Tehran, where troops moving between Baku, Rasht, and Zeli and the interior concentrated, and from which operations against local movements such as the Jangalis were directed. By 1917, the town was full of restless Russian soldiers exposed to revolutionary propaganda, with transport units and technical formations like automobile companies particularly politicized. Okay, so then you had officially General Baratov was Dmitri's commanding officer still, and he controlled the military troops there, the traditional military troops, not so much, well, he was in charge of everything, but the body that Dmitri had been part of, gosh, this is stupid of me because I know it, but I can't think of what the overall body of troops was called that Baratov was in charge of. Maybe I just better quit while I'm ahead, but apparently it sounds like it was a staging place that people were coming and going constantly. Different kinds of troops were coming and going constantly. By May, it was clear that Dmitri couldn't stay there anymore. Baratov explained to him, it's too dangerous for you, and it's too dangerous for the rest of us, because having a Grand Duke or a Monarch Grand Duke there would not have been something that would have allowed them to work at all with the Soldiers Committee. So that was why he left and went to Tehran and ended up with the Marlings. Okay, so what he's heard, what Rawlinson is saying, is that there's now a rival body calling itself the Committee of Public Safety, and I believe that goes back to the French Revolution. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that committees of public safety were the sort of conservative alternative to the revolutionary bodies, and an attempt to get control back from the revolutionary bodies. And so it would make sense that was what this one was calling itself. I say it was a rival committee, but the news that Rawlinson was bringing is that it had actually succeeded in dislodging the radical, the Bolshevik Soldiers Committee. So, Dmitri doesn't know if this is true or not. He talks about this printing endeavor that had started way back in May. This disgusting newspaper, as he calls it, in the most socialistic spirit. That was a clever thing that the Bolsheviks tended to do wherever they were, was take over the means of communication and control it. They could put their propaganda out, and other messages and news sources would not be getting out to undercut what they were saying. And they could spread their propaganda. And the thing that I didn't know, that I found out looking at the information that the Perplexity was able to come up with, was that these were all over. These soldiers' committees and the propaganda, including in Tehran itself. And Dmitri doesn't talk about that. So I gather then that they weren't strong in those areas, so it wasn't something that he was worried about. Apparently, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like something someone could write a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation on, and it would be fascinating. I'd love to read that. Okay, so he quite rightly asked, what is this new committee? Is it revolutionary? What does order mean? It's energetically restoring order, but what kind of order? So yeah, good question. And when he says it's a typical phenomenon, extremely typical phenomenon with regard to what's been happening lately, it was indeed, not only in Russia, but in the outlying areas that Bolshevik ideology was rapidly spreading to, and had already spread to. All right, so then we turn to gambling, and he's doing great. He won, he got his money from Staroselsky. Then he says, somehow I ended up back at the club playing baccarat again. Well, luck is with him this time. He's won back 1,400. If I recall, that was almost precisely the amount that he'd lost to Staroselsky. Now he is the holder of the debt, and Staroselsky is the debtor. So undoubtedly, as he says, this is much better and more pleasant, that sardonic tone that Dmitri has, although clearly it's also true. Okay, so and when we switch to the short entry of the 30th of October, we see that he's still, at that point, the conversation has not yet taken place. That is yet to come. That will be on the 1st of November that he has this conversation with Lady Marling. Okay, so what do we have next time? Well, we have what do we have? We have the planning stage of an expedition with the Swedish gendarmes to hunt wild asses. I don't know why anybody would hunt donkeys. After all, you're not going to eat them. But anyway, they are planning this expedition. They've invited Dmitri to go. He seems kind of excited about it. He'll tell us all about this, and I'll give you a heads up that it turns out to be kind of an iffy thing, kind of a dangerous thing. But as I say, tomorrow we'll only be talking about the planning stages of that, and then I think we'll also have time to do the next diary entry, which is this conversation with Lady Marling, and he has more to say about her in particular. So I hope to see you for both of those. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.